Tom Greenwood. Welcome to Everyman Carpentry. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about safety with the circular saw. This is a real common tool for carpentry, and it can cut your thumbs off, and that's not cool. So we're going to talk about some things to do to keep your thumbs attached to your body. So I've got a list of rules that I kind of use to make sure that I'm safe. And the first thing that you should ever do is make sure you have eye protection when you're working with power equipment, and I strongly recommend ear protection. I like this little kind right here that goes around the back of my neck. I can clip it into my ears. Boom, eye protection. Now, theoretically, my hearing is safe and my eyes are safe. I won't have these on for the rest of the video because I'm not going to be cutting much. Okay, so as far as the saw goes, there's a few steps that I go through to make sure that the saw is safe and ready to cut. And the first thing is cord. I want a corded circular saw. It's got a cord, I check and make sure that the cord doesn't have any breaks in it. There's no bare wire. I can't see the wire. I don't want to get shocked. It's a real shock hazard. That's a bad day if you get shocked. So first thing I do is check the cord. I'll check the saw, give it a visual inspection, make sure that everything's in place. Everything's in place. One thing that I do right out of the gate is I like to check for square on my saw. So I'll take my speed square. This is a Swanson brand speed square. And what I do is I turn the saw over and pull the guard out of the way. And I check for square. So I just take the speed square, put it on the plate, slide it up against the blade. Boom. Our blade is square, so we're good to cut. Whenever I'm working with the saw, I always try and keep my finger off the trigger. If I slip or fall or something happens, I don't want to pull the trigger and cut my leg off. So keep your finger off the trigger when you're working with the saw unless you intend to actually cut something. So when I'm ready to cut, what I do is there's the blade side and the motor side. And what I want to do is I want the motor to sit on, and the plate and everything to sit over my stock so that the weight is resting on the material that I'm cutting. So I always keep my motor over my stock, almost always. So that's thing one. I also like to think about the blade itself. There's a plane. So if the blade is like, it extends into infinity, there's what I call the plane of the blade. And what I don't ever want to do, I always try to avoid, is being in plane. So right now I would be in plane. If it kicked back, it would hit me. I don't want my hand to be in plane with the blade. I don't want any part of my body. So when I'm working with the blade, I always try and stay on one side or all the way on the other side of it, but I try and stay out of that plane of the blade. That's how bad things happen. When I'm ready to cut, I've got everything set up. I got my stock set up and I'm ready to work. When I start the saw up, I want to let the motor come all the way up to speed before I cut. There's a risk of kickback. Kickback is when bad things happen to you. So I always let the motor spool all the way up before I cut into my stock. One thing to think about is that the tool does the work. I don't try and force it into it. I just let the blade cut its own speed and press in. You'll hear a change in pitch in the motor if you're pressing too hard. So what I want to do is I want to let the tool do the work. A big place that accidents happen working with circular saws is pinching. Okay, so a pinch happens when we're working with stock. Let me take this out of the way and I'll give you a demonstration of how that might happen. So what pinch is if I have my stock supported here and here and I cut in the middle of it, what happens is there's a tendency the material will bend like this. And what happens is it pinches the blade. And when the blade pinches, one, it dulls the blade, it wears it out quicker. And the other thing is it causes kickback. It'll cause the tool to kick back at me. So what I do instead is that I have my work supported, and when I cut so that my piece of scrap falls away and that the thing that I'm keeping stays here. So instead of cutting in between two things where it can fold in, it's just one falls away and I'm safe that way. The last thing is that I will cut through a piece of material. So a lot of mistakes that occur in cuts with a circular saw happen when the person doesn't push all the way through. So what happens is they'll be pushing, and it's like, oh, it cut enough, and then they kind of quit, and the stock will get a weird little shape on the end. It's a miscut. So I always push through. And that way it ensures that the blade clears, the guard snaps back into place, and that I'm safe and that the stock is cut well. So when I do plug in the saw, one thing I like to do is I tie the cords together, and there's a tendency to like step on the cords and they come apart, and that's a risk. So what I'll do is I'll just tie a simple knot, a little square knot, and pull it tight-ish, and then I plug in my cords, and it's a lot less likely if they get tugged on that it's going to get disconnected, but if I need to, I can pull it apart rather quickly. So that's just something I do. It's not a rule or anything, it's just something that I work with. So before I cut, I put my stock in place, and when I start the saw, I'll line my blade up with my mark. There's also a convenient little guide here that tells me where that mark is, but I start the saw and I let the motor get up to speed first. Good, that tells me that it's going. Then, when I cut, I let the saw do the work. Clear, take my finger off the trigger. Boom. I'm working with a circular saw to try and be safe. The goal is always to come home at the end of the day with everything that I showed up to work or at the shop with. I don't want to cut myself or cut anything else off of my body or injure someone. So if you use these rules, you're going to be a lot less likely to hurt yourself or someone else. If you're getting value out of these videos, let me know in the comments. If you need to see something in the future, you want to know about a tool or a process, let me know. I'll be more than happy to do a video on it. Please subscribe to my channel. It helps with my getting pushed up in the algorithms. If you're getting value out of this and you want to throw me a few bucks, I've got a Patreon, Everyman Carpentry. The money that comes from that goes into buying tools, it goes into buying stock, it goes into improving the quality of what we're making here. So let me know if this stuff's working, if it's helping, and I appreciate your time.